On the morning of September 1, 2019, the atmosphere in the Sumney family home was tense. The previous day, John Shee, an elderly man and brother of Margaret Sumney, had died in Pennsylvania. Relatives began calling each other to inform them of the tragedy and to arrange the funeral. However, one of the deceased sisters encountered difficulties. She was unable to reach Margaret. This caused concern. After several unsuccessful calls, she decided to contact Helen, Margaret's eldest daughter from her first marriage. Helen immediately tried to call her mother, but her attempts were unsuccessful. Several hours passed, but Margaret never responded by phone or text message. This behavior was uncharacteristic. The mother always stayed in touch and never disappeared without explanation, even for a short time. Suddenly, a call came from her number, but on the other end of the line was not Margaret, but her son, David Lee Sumney Jr., whom the family called Junior. When Helen heard his voice, she was surprised. Junior had not lived with his mother for a long time, and his presence in her house seemed strange to her. She immediately asked where Margaret was. The answer was curt, "She's asleep." That sounded unsettling. It was already well past 9:00 a.m., and on a day when he received news of the death of a loved one, she certainly wouldn't sleep that late. Helen asked her brother to wake her mother, but he declined, suggesting he call back later. He didn't answer any further questions and ended the call. After the call, Helen was troubled. Her brother's behavior seemed cold and strange to her, his appearance at her mother's house inexplicable. She knew that Margaret and Junior's relationship wasn't easy, and his evasions only increased her concern. Margaret Sumney, née Shade, was born on June 28, 1958 in Pennsylvania. Her parents, John and Wheeling Shade, were highly respected in the area and owned a dance school that was very popular with the locals. They had 5 children, Margaret being the youngest. From early childhood, she spent much of her time at the dance school, first as a student, then as an assistant, and later as a teacher. She taught ballet classes, helped organize the annual concerts, and supported the administration. Over time, her contribution to the family business became an indispensable part of its functioning. According to the recollections of acquaintances, Margaret was a cheerful, sociable, and energetic woman. She easily connected with people of different ages, took care of herself, and led an active lifestyle. Her appearance and manners always attracted attention. In everyday life, she was organized and able to get things done. Margaret married very young. Her husband was named John Joseph Thierry, Chirper. However, family life didn't work out. He was emotionally distant and showed no interest in the marriage or the children. They soon separated. This marriage produced 2 daughters, Helen and Peggy. After the divorce, the entire responsibility for the children fell on her shoulders. Her ex-husband took almost no responsibility for them, and she had to combine her maternal duties with work in the studio. Despite the difficulties, she managed thanks to the support of her family and her employment in the family business. Margaret provided a stable home for her daughters. Domestic discipline was combined with care rather than strictness. Over time, David Lee Sumney entered her life, a dentist with a successful career and a Harvard education. He seemed confident, reserved, and charismatic. Margaret and David began dating and married a few years later, in 1986. It was a new phase in their lives, this time more stable and harmonious. The couple moved into a spacious and well-equipped house. There were no financial difficulties, and Margaret and her daughters could afford a level of comfort she had previously only dreamed of. In 1989, their son, David Lee Sumney Jr., was born. The event was of great importance to both his parents and his stepsisters. David Sr. was actively involved not only in the upbringing of his son, but also in that of his daughters, with whom he developed a warm relationship. The family seemed happy, financial prosperity, mutual support, a caring father, and a strong relationship. All this gave the impression of a perfect family. However, behind the facade lay something that no one talked about at the time. The youngest son grew up in complete freedom and unlimited comfort. His parents tried to fulfill his every wish, which quickly led to a consumerist attitude to life. All his wishes were fulfilled without discussion. Gradually, he realized that he could use this to his advantage. Already in elementary school, Junior began to manipulate adults. He demanded a reward for every action. Even simple requests from his parents became an opportunity for negotiations. Refusing help and acquiescing to whims became the norm for him. He took praise for granted but expected material rewards. Thus, a dangerous parenting disorder began to develop in the family, the consequences of which would only become apparent much later. Over the years, Junior's behavior became increasingly problematic. His parents never restricted him in anything. Any dissatisfaction on his part immediately led to concessions. Even when he made excessive, unfounded demands, Margaret and David Sr. did not try to stop him. They believed that by granting their son the freedom, they could maintain a warm relationship with him and build his self-confidence. In practice, however, this only reinforced his sense of omnipotence and superiority over others. One of the most disturbing incidents occurred during his childhood and remained in the family's memory for a long time. Junior found a small bird in the backyard. He picked it up and squeezed it so hard that it died. He showed no fear or guilt. He held the dead bird calmly in his hand, as if it were nothing special. Margaret was shocked. Later, when she talked about it, she said half-jokingly that her son's behavior resembled that of a murderer, but there was genuine concern behind it. This wasn't an isolated incident, and from an early age he showed no empathy, didn't seek emotional contact, and didn't feel responsible for his actions. His parents didn't know how to respond. Instead of trying to change their approach, they continued to hope the problem would resolve itself. However, the lack of clear boundaries only reinforced his destructive personality traits. In 2001, Margaret and David Lee Sumney's marriage broke down. The previously stable relationship began to unravel. The divorce was relatively peaceful, but the consequences were significant. At the time, her son was about 12 years old. After the divorce, Margaret's financial situation deteriorated dramatically. Her ex-husband's support ended, and the income from the family dance studio, which she had previously relied on, was no longer sufficient. The studio began to make losses, and Margaret soon decided to close it. This meant not only the loss of her job, but also of an important part of her life. To cover her ongoing expenses, she had to take a job as a saleswoman in a clothing store. The work was not prestigious, but it was sufficient to cover her basic needs. Her son's demands did not diminish. Junior continued to demand special treatment and the comforts he was used to. His behavior did not change. He expected all his wishes to be met unconditionally. Despite the divorce and his own financial difficulties, David Sr. continued to make concessions to his son. He supported his wife financially, even if this was to his own detriment. Instead of setting clear boundaries, he behaved as before and tried at all costs to maintain contact with his son. Although the former spouses were no longer together, while they lived together, they remained dependent on Junior's behavior. he lived alternately with his mother and father, and both parents continued to fulfill his demands. Teenager practically controlled the adult's behavior, and their desire to please him did not disappear despite the deterioration of living conditions. This phase became critical. Financial difficulties, the loss of stability, and the disintegration of the family coincided with their son's increasingly destructive behavior. The parents did not reconsider their tactics and continued to act according to the old pattern in which Junior's needs took priority. In 2008, at the age of 18, David Lee Sumney Jr. enrolled at university to study mathematics. His parents saw this as an opportunity for change. They hoped that studying at a prestigious institution would help him develop independence and discipline. David Sr. covered his tuition fees. On-campus accommodation was expensive, but the costs were shared between both parents. Margaret and David met their obligations despite their financial constraints. Junior lived in his own apartment near campus. Everything he needed was provided. In 2010, Margaret decided to visit her son. She went to Washington to make sure everything was okay. During this trip, something happened that later raised many questions. She unexpectedly called her daughter Helen and told her that she was in the hospital with Junior. According to her, her son had tried to injure himself with a knife, and she herself had fallen and hit her head. The information was vague. Helen noticed inconsistencies. Her mother didn't explain exactly what had happened, answered evasively, and avoided details. P.S. Upon arriving at the hospital, she learned that Margaret and Junior were in different rooms, even though this wasn't necessary in their case. This struck her as odd. The medical staff also didn't provide a clear explanation. She suspected that the incident had unfolded differently than Margaret had tried to describe. Junior had always behaved erratically, and Helen suspected that a violent argument might have broken out between him and his mother. This suspicion was also supported by the fact that the mother appeared distraught but continued to justify her son's behavior. There was no official investigation following this incident. Neither Margaret nor Junior discussed the causes of the incident. However, shortly after his hospitalization, it was revealed that Junior had been expelled from the university. The school administration had identified systematic violations of regulations and inappropriate behavior. He had missed classes, gotten into conflicts, and ignored teachers' requests. The expulsion was a blow to his parents. After so much effort and investment, they had expected a different outcome, but instead of progress, they received confirmation that their son's behavior was only worsening. Junior was forced to return to Pennsylvania, where he again lived alternately with each of his parents. His studies, which was supposed to mark the beginning of an independent adult life, ended in failure and new troubling signs. In July 2015, a conflict arose between David Lee Sumney Jr. and his father, which became one of the most difficult events in their family history. Junior was 26 years old, neither studying nor working, continued to live off his parents' expenses, and continued to view them as a source of income, regardless of their means. That day, he demanded money from his father for a trip. It was a considerable amount. David Sr., who was struggling with personal financial problems at the time, simply could not fulfill his son's request. He explained that a vacation was impossible because there was no money for it. And there was. Junior accepted but there was no refusal. Instead of ending the conversation, he began to shout and become threatening. The argument escalated into physical violence. Junior attacked his father with brutal force. He hit him with his hands and didn't stop, even when the man could no longer defend himself. Neighbors who heard the screams and sounds of the altercation called the police. When officers arrived at the scene, they found Junior in the act of beating his father. David Sr. suffered severe injuries. Doctors diagnosed a cerebral hemorrhage, a spinal injury, and multiple bruises. He was taken to the hospital in critical condition. After an examination, the doctors concluded that the patient's condition required constant care. From that moment on, David could no longer move independently. He required round-the-clock care and was later transferred to a nursing home. He could no longer work. Junior was charged, but the classification of the crime confused his relatives. Instead of attempted murder, the investigation was limited to aggravated assault. Despite the severity of the consequences, the court set bail, and Junior was soon released. The victim himself was unable to attend the trial. As before, Junior escaped serious punishment. This case was a turning point for the entire family. The illusion that his behavior was controllable was finally shattered. After the attack on his father and a brief prison sentence, David Lee Summy Jr. was not seriously held accountable. Despite the seriousness of the incident, he remained at large and acted as if nothing had happened. After some time, he told his relatives that he had supposedly joined the U.S. Navy. He actively spread this information among family members and acquaintances, claiming that he had passed the selection and now held a position associated with maintaining discipline and internal order. Margaret once again believed her son. Despite the previous instances of aggression, she saw his statements as an opportunity for change. Military service associated her with a strict but structured environment where one had to follow rules and respect a clear hierarchy. She hoped this would influence his behavior. However, there was no official confirmation of his service. All information came exclusively from Junior himself. He presented no identification, showed no uniform, and revealed no details. He answered all questions evasively or aggressively, At the same time, he began to train intensively. Within a short period of time, his appearance changed dramatically. He built up significant muscle mass and became physically imposing. At almost 2 meters tall, he appeared intimidating, especially to those who had already witnessed his outbursts of anger. These external changes were accompanied by increasing aggressiveness. Junior became irritable, often threatened, and easily lost his temper. Interactions with him became tense. He emphasized his superiority and made no secret of his preference for resolving conflicts with violence. He demanded absolute submission from those around him. His relatives began to doubt the veracity of his stories about military service. Some openly stated that his behavior did not reflect that of a soldier. Junior then began to intimidate her. He clearly left no room for doubt about his story and tried to stop any conversations that might challenge it. In November 2016, another incident occurred at Margaret's house. At night, heavily intoxicated, Junior entered his mother's bedroom and began choking her. The attack was sudden. He used force. Due to his physical superiority, he easily broke his mother's resistance. Margaret woke up because she couldn't breathe. He wordlessly squeezed her throat. The only way to end the attack was to scream and break free. At some point, he let her go and went to his room. Margaret then called the police. Arriving officers found Junior asleep in another room. He was heavily intoxicated. Margaret had marks on her neck and bruises around her ribs. She reported that her son had tried to strangle her, saying, "That's what we do in the Marines." This raised further questions, but initially, attention focused on the actual use of force. Junior was arrested on the spot. the district attorney's office filed a case of aggravated domestic violence. During the investigation, however, Margaret asked that her son's actions not be classified as a serious crime. She insisted that such an entry in the file could ruin his career because he was supposedly a soldier. She claimed that the act was committed under the influence of alcohol and that her son didn't know what he was doing. In her opinion, he needed treatment, not punishment. These statements influenced the investigation. Ultimately, the classification was changed. Instead of criminal charges, he was charged with a misdemeanor offense under the Domestic Violence Act. Thus, Junior avoided severe punishment and was soon released. During the investigation, a background check revealed that he had never registered with the U.S. Navy. The information about his military service was completely fabricated. Junior had not undergone any selection procedures, was unregistered, and had no connection to the military. He had previously assured his mother of this, as well as other relatives, to create the impression that he had a stable and respected profession. The image of a soldier helped him control publicity, inspire confidence, and justify his aggressive personality traits. In fact, it was a form of manipulation. In reality, he was a person prone to violent outbursts, alcohol abuse, and systematic harm to those around him. Even after it was revealed that her son had lied about his military service, Margaret did not change her opinion of him. She continued to hope that he could change. Her decision to stand up for Junior after the attempted strangulation caused confusion among her relatives. However, her actions were not guided by reason, but by a deep emotional attachment that prevented her from objectively viewing the events. Later, in another trial that considered his actions as a whole, including his lying about his military service, Junior was finally charged. The court found him guilty and sentenced him to 16 months in prison. Despite the reclassification of the offense to a less serious one, the sentence included a stay in a detention center. This was the first time he had been held accountable. During his time in prison, Junior actively cooperated with social services. In discussions with representatives of the administration, he emphasized his alcohol addiction and insisted that it was the cause of his behavior. He claimed that he could not control his actions while drunk and that he needed treatment, not imprisonment. This stance was well thought out. He knew that his addiction could be considered a mitigating factor. These arguments impressed the social worker handling his case. A report was prepared recommending that he be transferred to a specialized addiction treatment facility. The court granted this request, and Junior was transferred to a rehabilitation center in Pennsylvania. The program included group sessions, therapy, and daily check-ins. Officially, he was considered a participant in the rehabilitation process. Margaret immediately became involved in the process. She visited her son, brought him necessary items, and spoke with the center's counselors. Despite the previous acts of violence, she once again believed in the possibility of positive change. For her, the mere participation of her son meant the rehabilitation program showed that he admitted his mistakes and was willing to change. After completing the course, Junior was released on parole. He was placed in temporary supervised housing with the right to work. After some time, he found a job. According to the center, he adhered to his daily routine and showed interest in a new life. This created the appearance of positive changes. His relatives began to hope that his aggressive behavior was a thing of the past. Outwardly, he behaved with restraint and gave no cause for complaint. In reality, however, his fundamental attitudes remained unchanged. He did not acknowledge his guilt, did not take responsibility for his past, and showed no remorse. Everything that was done was aimed at reducing the system's control and restoring formal freedom. In August 2018, David Lee Sumney Sr. passed away. He was 74 years old and died in a nursing home where he had been recovering from the injuries he sustained in the attack by his son. Official documents stated the cause of death as a general deterioration in his health. However, his relatives were convinced that the beating in 2015 was the trigger for his rapid physical and mental decline. At the time of his father's death, Junior was at large and was not held accountable for the consequences of the attack. A legal connection between his actions and his father's death was not established. Neither the investigating authorities nor the public prosecutor's office reviewed the circumstances of 2015 in light of the new information. At the funeral, Margaret remained calm and reserved. She made no accusations against her son. Even in the face of the obvious connection between the attack and the death of her ex-husband, she did not change her stance. Her behavior increased tensions within the family. In 2019, Junior began a new relationship. He met a woman through a mobile app. Her name is not mentioned in the files because she wishes to remain anonymous. The relationship developed rapidly. Shortly after they met, she moved in with him. Initially, he behaved correctly, was polite, attentive, caring, and outwardly reserved. This gave the impression that he had changed. Shortly after they began living together, Junior's behavior began to change. He began dictating strict conditions, controlling his partner's daily activities, and demanding absolute submission. Any attempt to contradict him triggered outbursts of anger and aggression. The woman soon noticed the strange behavior. She found checks made out to his mother's name on Junior's property and realized he was using them for personal purchases. When she asked him why he was doing this, he replied that Margaret supposedly suffered from a mental illness and was unable to manage her own finances, and he was only helping her pay the bills. According to him, he regularly signed checks in her name. However, he had no legal basis for such actions, and he had wonder said. There were no documents confirming his mother's incapacity, nor was there a power of attorney. When his partner suggested settling the matter officially, he began to avoid the subject, citing the supposedly lengthy formalities with state authorities. She began to suspect him of dishonesty, but at the time had no evidence to contact the police. When she finally decided to end the relationship, Junior could not accept this. He continued to insist on resuming the relationship, forcing himself on her and showing up unannounced. After another refusal, he resorted to violence. Under the pretext of a meeting, he lured his former partner to a hotel room in Atlantic City and held her there against her will for several days. The woman was physically abused, psychologically coerced, and deprived of her freedom. Junior beat her, restricted her movement, and strangled her several times until she lost consciousness. At one point, he believed she was dead and left the room. The woman was left unconscious and seriously injured, with no way to get help. On the third day, hotel staff noticed the "Do Not Disturb" sign, which hadn't been removed the entire time. One of the employees decided to check the room and found the woman in critical condition. She was immediately taken to the hospital. Doctors diagnosed serious injuries, but thanks to timely assistance, the woman was saved. Police were able to quickly identify the attacker. An arrest warrant was issued, but due to a technical error, the data wasn't entered into the federal database in time. This allowed Junior to leave the state and return to Pennsylvania unhindered. By the time the injured woman was admitted, he was already in another region. Although the warrant was officially issued on July 16, 2019, its absence from the general search system meant that during Junior's next arrest in Pennsylvania in a different case, officers failed to establish a connection to the Atlantic City attack. He was released because he was not listed in the search database. And changed data. This error was the result of a lack of coordination between agencies. As a result, a man who had committed a serious crime remained at large. The consequences of this error were fatal. An even more gruesome crime soon followed. On September 1, 2019, Margaret's brother, John Shee, died. Relatives began calling each other to arrange the funeral, but, as is known, no one could reach Margaret. The next morning, September 2, Helen continued to call. At one point, Junior answered the call. He said he was at his mother's house and her mother was asleep. He avoided further explanation. When asked to answer the phone, he didn't respond and only promised to call back later. His behavior seemed strange to him. To him, the family decided to contact the police and request a check on Margaret's health. A patrol arrived on the scene, but no one answered the door. The house appeared occupied, but there were no signs of movement inside. After several attempts to make contact, the officers decided to force their way in. Upon searching the house, it became immediately clear that something serious had happened. There was a strong odor inside. Traces of blood were visible on the walls and floor. The surroundings indicated a struggle. On the floor, there were traces of what appeared to be a body being dragged. Towels were found that had been used to remove the blood. Margaret's body was found in the second-floor bathroom. She showed no signs of life. Death had occurred at least one day earlier. The body showed numerous injuries, including head and neck trauma. The blood loss and the general condition of the apartment suggested a violent crime. During the examination of the apartment, a metal sickle with brownish deposits was found outside the bathroom. Its location suggested it had been used before the body was placed in the bathtub. It was also discovered that a revolver registered to Margaret had disappeared from the house. Only an empty cartridge box was found in the drawer. The crime scene was classified as particularly serious. Forensic investigators secured all evidence and began examining the devices in the house. Of interest were a laptop and an external USB drive belonging to Junior. An examination of the USB drive revealed 277 photos taken after Margaret's death, Mason of Goers. The images show the body being transported through various parts of the house. Some images were staged. Junior himself was seen in them, in some cases taking selfies with the body. The visual evidence suggested that the crimes were committed in cold blood and over an extended period of time. Search queries made before and after the crime were also found on the laptop. These included instructions for removing bloodstains, treating surfaces, and examining the stages of decomposition of a corpse. This definitively confirmed that the crime was planned. The crime scene was classified as one of the worst in the investigative team's entire career. Bloodstains, chaos in the premises, attempts to conceal evidence, and the amount of digital material pointed to an extremely brutal crime. Initial findings indicated that the perpetrator acted cold-bloodedly, calculatingly, and without any compassion. The police asked Helen for help, who was still in contact with him despite their separation. She agreed to cooperate in the arrest, assuming that Junior would most likely attend Uncle John's funeral. The police organized the arrest on the scene. Junior did indeed show up during the funeral service. He was arrested immediately after the funeral. During a body search, items belonging to Margaret were found: jewelry and checks made out to her name. He was charged with premeditated murder, embezzlement, desecration of a corpse, and a number of related offenses. A psychiatric examination confirmed his sanity. In August 2022, he entered into a plea deal with prosecutors and pleaded guilty to third-degree murder. The court sentenced him to between 20 and 40 years in prison. Taking into account the time already served, he will be eligible for release in 2039, at the age of 50. Margaret's family was dissatisfied with the verdict. They believed the prosecution had compromised by failing to adequately consider the seriousness of the crime. Margaret's sisters and daughters stated that the sentence imposed was disproportionate to the extent of the crime. Junior apologized in the courtroom, stating that he did not understand how he could have committed murder. These words were met with suspicion by the family. For them, everything that had happened was the result of years of violence, impunity, and the system's refusal to intervene in a timely manner. Within a short period of time, the family lost two people: John, the brother, and Margaret herself. After the trial, Helen completely cut off contact with her brother. She no longer considered him part of the family. All that remained were the consequences and the realization that the tragedy could have been avoided. Thanks for watching, and take care.